Dominique.
The Middle East is in the news this morning. The ceasefire deal on the verge of collapse.
Yeah, Dr. Phil joins us right now to discuss that. You know the Middle East firsthand. You've traveled over there several times. You actually spoke and had an interview with Netanyahu back in November. Many times he has said to you, total annihilation of Hamas. When you see something that happened this week with the funeral with the babies, is this the point that breaks him, that he goes to his military and says, this is it, we have to wipe them out?
Well, that's what he is saying. This has been a contradiction in terms to me. I don't understand, because I know in talking with Netanyahu originally, he said under no uncertain terms, he had one primary objective, and that was to wipe Hamas off the face of the earth. He said anything short of that, it's not a matter of if, but when they will attack again the way they did. He said it wasn't an act of war, it was an act of terror. And he said they will just regroup, reman, and come back again. And then to do this ceasefire like this, it seemed to me this was unlikely to hold across time. And sure enough, when they produced the bodies of these two precious children, and then there were 4 released, but the third body that's supposedly the mother, and they find out that it's just an anonymous body, and it turns out, I believe they think now it is a Gazan woman. They are just both heartbroken and outraged, and he has said very clearly to the Israeli population, we will make them pay for this. This is a violation of the terms of the ceasefire, and they have responded. Hamas has said, well, they were killed in a bombing by Israeli bomb, and body parts got mixed up. We couldn't tell who was who, so it was just a mistake. Anybody that believes that can stand on their head. I just don't think anybody in Israel believes that, and I think he is very focused. And I don't see how this can hold at this point. I don't see how they can trust them.
So we asked our correspondents this morning. They said several times this was the scenario. After this, however long it takes, a couple of days, does Netanyahu get his military forces and say, we are wiping them out? We know where they are in Gaza, using hostages as shields. We're taking them out, including the hostages, those 70-plus hostages that remain. And they both said, yes, they see that scenario. One had a time limit of a couple of weeks, couple of months. One of our correspondents said, no, this could be immediate.
Well, I don't think he is someone to react in anger. I don't think he's someone to knee-jerk react. But I don't think he expected this ceasefire to hold. I don't think he expected them to honor this. I don't think they went into it in good faith. They have not responded in good faith here. And I think they have intelligence. And I think there are real questions as to whether there are additional hostages that are still alive. Look, Benjamin Netanyahu is very sensitive to the families that have hostages still being held, alive or not. I think he believes that he owes a debt to those families, and he's going to do everything he can to get those hostages back if there's a way to do that. But there comes a point where you have to, weigh things out, and I think he's saying, I think he believes that there's probably not a lot, if any, of those hostages still alive. Now, who knows? There may be. But how do you deal with these people when they're not being honest and they violate this right now? Look, here's the thing. When they did this terror attack against women, children, and elderly, most non-combatants, they knew what would happen. They knew Israel would retaliate, right? I mean, you don't do that, and from a psychological standpoint, you don't do that in not think 2-3 steps down the road and think they're going to retaliate. So Hamas is the one who put these Palestinians in harm's way. They knew what was going to happen when they did it. Now they do this. What do they expect is going to happen? They know Prime Minister Netanyahu. They know he's not going to just say, oh, well, honest mistake, so I guess we'll just never see her again. Won't have her remains. The family won't have closure. None of this will happen the way you agreed to do it. So, okay, we'll just move on to the next one. They know that's not going to happen. They know it's not going to happen. They know he is going to retaliate and hold them accountable. So what happens if he doesn't? What's the next thing they're going to do? So he has to respond, and they know he has to respond.
Well, and it's interesting. It's almost sort of a dilemma, because for Hamas, it's more advantageous to them to be at war, right? Because being at war, they get to continue this on with Israel. If this goes through as the ceasefire is sort of thought out, these 3 phases, and at the end, they're supposed to be taken over, right? Someone else is supposed to come in and take over. So they want the war to continue. They don't want this ceasefire to end. And to your point, Dr. Phil, when you said Benjamin Netanyahu is very focused on wiping out Hamas, this ceasefire deal, I think, if anybody had any question about how to handle Hamas, the way this has been handled every week as we saw these hostages come and how emaciated they were. And then this one with the Bibas family. And the Bibas family, really, I think everyone is familiar with that footage where the militants were gathered around the mother as she was clinging to her babies as they were being taken off. And knowing that they were going to be returned this week, and we were all watching for it. And then to see those coffins being paraded through those militants and the little children cheering along with the militants, and then to find out that not only is it not the mother's body, but we're being told now that those 2 babies were executed, were by hand, they were killed very early on, and then their bodies were mangled to try and cover up what they had done. I don't know where the line can be. As you said, how else can Prime Minister Netanyahu respond at this point? There's nothing worse that you could really do as a human.
Well, there isn't, and you're making a deal with those kinds of monsters? What kind of deal can you make with it? The whole point that people, I think, need to understand from a psychological standpoint, from a religious standpoint, from an extremist standpoint, is they don't value life the way the rest of the world does. For them, death is an honor. Death is a celebration. They don't value life. So at this point, we have completely different currencies here. Israel wants life. They want future. They want people to grow up and have a future and a life and contribute to the world. That is not what Hamas wants to do. They want them dead. That's their objective. It's hard to negotiate with people who have one objective, and that is that you be dead. Mm-hmm. That's their objective, to wipe out all Israeli Jews, and then to go on beyond that. And this affects America because they have the same idea about everybody in the West. So there has to be a line drawn, and I think Netanyahu has drawn that line, then backed off of it for this ceasefire, and they're now violating the tenets of that. So what do you do? Do you let that slide? What do you think is going to happen if they let it slide? Mm-hmm. So he just has to do something about this, and I think it's going to be swift. I think it's going to be harsh, and I don't think it's going to be easy to get him back to the table. And he said something to me that I think weighed very heavily on me. He said, I want the rest of the world to support Israel in doing this, but we'll do it with them or without them, because if we don't, they will continue to do this. And I owe it to the Israeli people to do this. I want the support. I'll do it with it or without it.
And he did respond to the bombings and the activity this week with the funeral. Let's listen in on what he had to say.
These Hamas monsters also cynically refused to bring back the boy's mother, Shiri, and sent the body of a Gazan woman instead, in brazen violation of the agreement. All of Israel is united in grief. And as the Prime Minister of Israel, I vow that I will not rest until the savages who executed our hostages are brought to justice. They do not deserve to walk this earth. Nothing will stop me. Nothing.
So let's say that's the scenario out there, that after this week, after seeing what happened, he can't trust them, the ceasefire ends, or maybe on Saturday they release the 6 hostages remaining, and he completely wipes them out. If you're him, if he calls you and says, what do I say to the families of the remaining hostages? If this is the route that I go to take them out, even knowing they're using the hostages as shields, the 70 are gone, but we're taking out these main functions, these areas of Hamas. Tell me, Dr. Phil, what do I say to these families to rectify that?
Well, I think his position there was unambiguous. He just said, these savages, I'm going to hunt them down and take them off the face of the earth.
40,000 of them.
And at this point, when he talks to the families, they have to face the reality that they cannot be trusted. These hostages are not safe with them. They're either continuing to be tortured and are likely to be killed. And so what's the trade here? Do we allow them to use them as leverage? They're likely already dead. And what are we going to do? Let them hold them for another 500 days? And then they kill them? At some point, you have to decide what's the best for the country, and maybe what's best for the hostages. And I've spoken to hostage families one-on-one that have hostages that have been returned, some that have lost their family member, and some that still have hostages over there. So clearly, if you have a family member being held, your number one priority is to get them back. If there's any hope whatsoever, you want them back. Clearly you do. But when you're dealing with these monsters, how can you negotiate with them? How can you believe anything that they say? And I think probably the calculus is you're better off to kill the captors and take them than to wait for them to voluntarily give them back. We've seen how that works. So I think his intention is to go in and take Hamas out and hopefully rescue those hostages if they're still alive.
He talked to you about the world's support. He'd do it with or without the world's support. He'd like to do it with the world's support. Do you think that at some point he will ask for any other countries to step in and assist them?
Clearly, he wants world support. He wants the United States support. He wants European support. He is surrounded over there, and this is a very important ally for America, strategic ally for America. And I think that naturally he wants the world to have the same response and outrage that they're feeling in Israel. I don't think he wants to go this alone if he can avoid it. But I think he's very committed. If that's the only choice, he's going to stand up for the Israelis. He has no choice, right? I mean, how do you deal with these people that they have no conscience, they have no empathy, they have no integrity? They're showing that with what they're doing.
I'm going to paint a picture that you're familiar with over your 30, 40 plus years of dealing with troubled teenagers. When you have those troubled teenagers that are abhorrent and they're making these moves, sometimes you have the parents on and you go directly to the parents saying, it's your fault. You did this to them. So let's paint the picture of Hamas. We know it's them. There's 40,000 members, but we know they're backed by Iran. When does the world wake up and say it's because of the leadership in Iran that's causing Hamas to do this? Hezbollah, the Houthis, all because of Iran. Has the world done enough to paint that evil picture of Iran leaders saying, we're going to put a stop to your leadership over these terror groups?
Well, I think certainly President Trump sees that with great clarity. And I don't think people can turn a blind eye to that any further. And I think with President Trump calling that out with clarity and taking actions to neutralize Iran as a threat, that has to send a message that, and maybe that makes Hamas more desperate because they're running out of support. But I don't think that they're going to stop doing what they're doing because that support's drying up behind them. The only thing that's going to stop them is stopping them. And that's exactly what Netanyahu intends to do. So we'll see how this plays out, but I don't see how this ceasefire continues even 24 hours. We'll see. Maybe diplomacy will win out, but I certainly would not be optimistic about that happening.
All right.
Dr. Field, thank you so much. We appreciate your time and your insights on this. You have such intimate knowledge of all of this. We appreciate your observations here. It's such a critical time for all of us. All right, and we'll be right back.